I'm John Fitzgerald, and this is part 3 of Sex and Contraception, What Catholic Men Need to Know. In part 1, we covered church teaching on sexual morality with a focus on Pope Paul VI's 1968 infallible encyclical, Humanae Vitae, on the regulation of human births. At the end of part 1, we outlined how certain physicians and pharmaceutical companies colluded and misled us about mechanisms and risks of hormonal contraceptives. In part 2, we discussed how dissident priests and bishops have failed to teach the truth about contraception. I advised of the risks, dangers, and side effects of hormonal contraceptives, and I covered the method effectiveness of both hormonal and barrier contraception and cited literature showing that NFP methods are as method effective as any contraceptives. And I ended that part with, what must a Catholic man do? In part 3, I'll teach fertility awareness for men in less than 10 minutes. I'll discuss discipline, and finally I'll cite a robust scientific study which finds couples using symptothermal method of natural family planning improve both a man's marriage and his sex life. Okay, so now I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about fertility awareness in 10 minutes. You need to understand both men and women's fertility. So here's men's. Men are always fertile. We create sperm and seminal fluid. If we have intercourse with a woman and reach orgasm, we deposit our seminal fluid in her vagina. And that's it for men's fertility awareness. Pretty easy, right? Now women's fertility awareness. Big difference. A woman's reproductive system is so incredibly complex. The woman's reproductive system is studied by observing charts of her menstrual cycle, and these charts can be so complex as to be stupefying. So men ask, why do I have to know about her cycle? She has to know about it. Not me. Here's why. You have a sex drive that is always in gear. You have to exercise discipline. And to do that, you have to know when and why you need to exercise discipline. So we are going to use a chart of a woman's menstrual cycle, but it is simplified. We're going to use a hypothetical 28-day regular menstrual cycle chart. Let me first caution that this is a chart used for training in fertility awareness, and it should not be used for natural family planning. NFP requires using an actual charting of the wife. So let's go to our menstrual cycle chart. So we are going to identify the rows in this chart, and you will see that on the top row we have 3 phases. Pre-ovulation phase, the ovulation phase, and then we have post-ovulation phase. And you will notice that in the ovulation phase, we target the peak day, about which I will say more. These are simplified phases. The medical phases are a lot more complicated and they are difficult to remember. The next line is a line of consecutive numbers from 1 through 28, and then one additional one which indicates the beginning of the next cycle. So these are simply the days of the 28-day regular cycle. Next we have colored boxes. These are filled in by the woman on a daily basis. The reds indicate the menstruation days, which are at the beginning of the menstrual cycle, and then there are 3 dry days, which are signified by the green boxes. Then there are 5 white boxes, which have babies in them, and day number 15 is yellow, but it has a baby in it also, and these indicate that there is a high rate of fertility in these days. Then those days are followed by day 16 and 17 yellow boxes, which are days which could also be fertile, and then 11 more days of post-ovulation phase, which are indicated by green, indicating infertile days. Now the next row is an indication of the sensations that women can feel on these various days. The heavy bleeding is the first 2 days, and then that's followed usually by 2 days of modest bleeding. And then there is 1 or 2 days of very light bleeding. Women just sense whether they are dry or wet. They don't have to touch themselves, and in the Billings method they don't. In the Creighton model, they wipe and examine. Now, the indication of dry is a sensation that the woman is feeling on her vulva for those 3 days after her period ends. It's an indication that the cervical mucus is not favorable for either nourishing or helping sperm navigate from the vagina through the cervix and the uterus and up the fallopian tubes to fertilize the egg released from the wife's ovary on peak day. After ovulation, the egg is traveling down the fallopian tube. Fertilization, that is conception, usually takes place in the fallopian tube about 7 or 8 days before implantation in the uterus. When the sensation of cervical mucus turns to wet, Those are indications that it is optimal for the sperm to be able to seek out the egg for fertilization. Then we have a final row which just indicates fertile and infertile days and whether the infertile days are more likely variable or constant. So we can see that the fertile days are in the ovulation phase. Now let's concentrate on peak day. The wife cannot get pregnant until she releases a ripe egg from her ovary. Does that mean she can only become pregnant if she has sex on the day she ovulates or at some time thereafter? No. Why not? Well, because the sperm can remain alive in favorable mucus for a period of 5, even 6 days prior to ovulation. So that means that intercourse 5 to 6 days before ovulation can result in fertilization and conception and pregnancy 5 days later. Well, you might ask, if she releases an egg on peak day, isn't she likely to get pregnant for several days or a week after that time? The answer is no. Why not? And the answer to that is because the egg only lives for 12 to 24 hours, unless it is fertilized and conception occurs. So how do you know peak day has occurred? Well, there are 2 ways. One is retrospective, by the woman checking on the sensation of her cervical mucus. If it's dry for 2 consecutive days after she ovulates, it's an indication that she is either pregnant or the egg has died, and she will not become pregnant until the next peak day. Another way to confirm peak day is by checking her temperature, which we will cover with another chart. A woman's basal body temperature is her resting temperature taken the same time every day, and this is best taken before she gets out of bed in the morning. Please note this basal body temperature chart and note that on the day of ovulation, which is peak day, her temperature goes down slightly. But after ovulation, there is a sharp increase, referred to as the thermal shift. This thermal shift of approximately 0.8 degrees Fahrenheit is evidence that ovulation has occurred. When there is both a thermal shift and the woman's sensation of dry cervical mucus, it is a strong indication that she is infertile.
We will mention the levels of one hormone. It is the luteinizing hormone, or LH levels. When the woman's level of luteinizing hormone, LH, starts to rise, it can help predict when ovulation will occur, and then confirm that ovulation has occurred. Ovulation means that the woman's ovary has released a mature egg. LH levels are low for most of the cycle, but around the middle, when an egg reaches a certain size in the ovary, the LH levels become very high. This is called the LH surge. The fertile phase begins about 6 days before ovulation and ends 2 to 3 days after ovulation. The phase is accompanied by cervical mucus, which is wet or stretchy by sensation or observation. Ovulation usually occurs at or near the peak of LH levels. The LH level can be measured by blood test or by measuring the LH level in urine. Ovulation predictor kits contain at-home tests that measure the LH levels in the urine. These kits often make use of computers to measure the LH level. There is at least one kit that has a free phone app that measures LH levels. Monitoring LH levels is one additional test to help the couple determine the fertile and infertile days. You'll note the similarity of the LH curve with the basal body temperature curve.
That's what you need to know as a Catholic man about your wife's fertile and infertile days. Save this and refer to it. Men have difficulty remembering fertility awareness. Okay, so now let's talk about discipline. Quote, "Only the disciplined are free. If you are not disciplined, you are a slave to your moods and passions." That's not from the Old or the New Testament. That's a quote from Eliud Kipchoge, the world's greatest marathon runner, speaking about how he trains and runs races. The Catholic man must be disciplined as a partner with his wife in practicing NFP. Let's see what Humanae Vitae says about discipline. To dominate instinct by means of one's reason and free will requires ascetical practices. Yet this discipline, far from harming conjugal love, rather confers on it a higher human value. It demands continued effort. The discipline favors attention for one's partner, helps both husband and wife drive out selfishness, the enemy of true love, and deepens their sense of responsibility. It sounds to me like Kipchoge has been reading Pope Paul VI. You don't need sex every day. You can abstain from sex 8 to 12 days per cycle. Do you want to live in mortal sin just so you can have sex 24/7? What are you, nuts? You're a Catholic. You know what happens if you die in mortal sin. Do you want to risk your eternal life in heaven with Christ because you can't discipline yourself? Here's another personal note. I'll tell you, I gave up cigarettes and I gave up sex. And giving up cigarettes was tougher. I had an appetite for sex and cigarettes, and I was addicted to both. I had no discipline. I knew what I had to do, so I gave up sex. I prayed for discipline. Let me tell you about some great Catholic models we have when it comes to sex and discipline. First, let's acknowledge all the faithful priests that are not abusing parishioners. They are living not just chaste lives, but also celibate lives because of their vows of never having sex. And then there are our devout brother Catholics who are attracted to men, not women. They're leading chaste lives. They're called to celibacy also. There is no marriage for them because same-sex sex is never open to the transmission of life. God bless them for their discipline and their example. You can leave a chaste life, Catholic man. The Church of Jesus Christ teaches us what is moral. Your free will should lead you to desire to follow church teaching. You simply need to pray and frequent the sacraments to ask Jesus to give you the discipline you need to live a chaste life. And may I suggest you try praying the Rosary daily. I told you that if you use NFP, you would not only be joyful about leading a chaste life and being in the state of grace, but there is also a high probability that you'll have a great sex life and be more than happy with your frequency of sexual intercourse. So this article is from Frontiers in Public Health, a peer-reviewed journal. It was published in February 2017, and it was a study of couples in the US and Europe, mostly married, who used natural family planning. This is not a Catholic publication. These were not Catholic couples. Some may have been. They used the symptothermal method. That means both the basal body temperature and the cervical mucus observation. It is a robust study of 2,560 respondents. 59% of them were married. That means 41% were not married. And the results were 95% of women said using NFP helped them know their bodies better. Large majorities of men and women felt NFP helped them improve their relationship. Most women, and even higher percentage of men, felt using NFP improved their sex life. 74% of men and women said they were either satisfied or very satisfied with their frequency of sexual intercourse. The symptothermal method of NFP is well accepted across several Western cultures. It is consistently viewed as being beneficial to couples' self-knowledge, their relationship, and satisfaction with frequency of sexual intercourse. Catholics have been swept up and in some cases have become leaders in the culture of sex without commitment or responsibility. And too many accept that abortion is an appropriate remedy when pregnancy results. Catholic men need to become involved and leaders in the counterculture movement back to chastity. We can begin by protecting our wives and daughters from the physicians, including Catholic physicians and pharmaceutical companies that are determined to get all women of childbearing age dependent on hormonal contraceptives. And we must evangelize our Catholic physicians to become the physicians Pope Paul VI envisioned when he stated, quote, "We hold those physicians and medical personnel in the highest esteem who, in the exercise of their profession, value above every human interest the superior demands of their Christian vocation." We must tell our Catholic physicians we want them instead to allow us to help them build strong NFP-only medical practices in every parish, not only for Catholics but for all men and women. The sex without commitment culture is a using culture, not a loving culture. Catholic men need to start bending the curve back to a Catholic culture.